You need to hear about the night 3 campers woke up in an RV that wasn't theirs, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and only one of them had any reason to be scared. At first. In a timber hollow in Leslie County, Kentucky, on the 3rd weekend of September 2014, 2 lifelong friends pulled a harmless hazing stunt on the boy they'd promised a relaxing night out before graduation. He had no idea he was the joke. By sunrise, the joke was the least of what happened out there, because only 2 of the 3 campers who climbed into that RV ever climbed back out. This is Waylon's story. Two hours before any of this happened, it was still just a plan around a dying fire. Get Arlo good and gone on Harlan's wax, carry him into the RV they'd scouted 2 weekends back, an old Dodge Sportsman half swallowed by kudzu, no plates, no owner either of them had ever bothered to track down, and let Harlan do the rest once Arlo woke up somewhere he didn't recognize. Nobody gets hurt. That was the whole plan. At 1:15 in the morning, Arlo's eyes cracked open in the dark, and the first thing he saw was Waylon lying right there next to him. "Where?" Arlo started. Waylon let his own eyes snap open a half-beat late, playing catch-up, playing every bit as lost as Arlo needed him to look. He'd rehearsed the yawn in his truck mirror on the drive out. Good work, he told himself. He had no way of knowing that the yawn would be the last thing about tonight that went according to script. Somewhere underneath the performance, Waylon was tracking the only number that mattered. Arlo's mother clocked out of the ER at County General at 6:30. If her son wasn't home before then, this stopped being a story their youth group whispered about for one Sunday, and started being the thing the whole church never let him live down. That's when he caught it through the window. A flick of Harlan's lighter outside, on and off, the same nervous habit Harlan always ran through right before he committed to a bit. Except this time, it didn't stop after one flick. It kept going, on and off, like his hands needed something to do that his mouth wasn't saying yet. Waylon didn't think much of it. Not yet. What he did notice, because it was hard not to, was the loose ring of numbered stakes driven into the dirt around the RV's tires, orange and black. The same ones he and Harlan had stepped over 2 weekends ago and never once asked about. Harlan had waved it off then. Somebody's old timber survey, probably. Waylon kept Arlo talking, kept the bit alive, and for a minute it worked. Arlo even laughed once, shaky but real, and asked how long they had to sit here before Harlan gave up and let them out. Waylon told him not long. Small problem solved. Then something dragged, slow and deliberate, along the outside of the RV's siding. Metal on aluminum, the kind of sound a hand makes when it's not in a hurry. And Harlan's voice came through the wall low and rough, already 3 shades deeper into character than the version they'd rehearsed at the fire ring. Waylon grinned wide for Arlo's benefit and hoped his face wasn't giving away the one thing he hadn't said out loud yet. That somewhere between the truck and the tree line, Harlan had stopped performing and started rehearsing something else entirely. Harlan's voice kept coming through the wall, and somewhere around the 3rd line, Waylon realized he didn't recognize any of it. They'd written the bit together at the fire ring. 3 lines, tops. Something about a man who lived out here and didn't like visitors. This wasn't that. This was specific in a way the script had never been, names and details Waylon hadn't put there, aimed at Arlo like Harlan had been saving them up. Waylon had helped write every word of the real script. He knew exactly how far off it Harlan already was. Under the door, a smell came creeping in that didn't belong to any prank either. Kerosene, thin at first, then not thin at all. Under that, a scrape that Waylon's stomach recognized before his brain caught up. Chain, being dragged and handled, not locked yet, just being set up close by. Neither one had ever made the prop list. 2 weekends earlier, same hollow, still daylight, it had all felt like nothing. Waylon and Harlan had walked the RV together, kicking through kudzu, checking angles, and Waylon had laid down the one condition he needed before he'd agree to any of it. The second this stopped being funny, he'd say the words, "That's enough, Harlan." And Harlan would drop it. No arguments, no matter how deep into the bit he already was. Harlan had agreed fast, almost too fast. He'd even repeated the words back, "That's enough, Harlan, got it," like he wanted to make sure he had them memorized. Waylon remembered thinking that was relief talking. He didn't think, at the time, to ask why Harlan's face had looked less like a man agreeing to a rule and more like a man writing one down. He didn't think to ask, either, why Harlan had spent that whole afternoon more interested in the tree line behind the RV than the RV itself, walking the same 40 feet of ground over and over like he was counting something only he could see. He told himself Harlan was just committing to the bit. He told himself that right up until he smelled what committing to the bit actually smelled like. His phone lit up against his leg. One bar, gone as fast as it came, a text from Dessa that had clearly been trying to send for a while. Harlan's asking Dad about the property line again. "Don't let him talk you past the tree line tonight." Waylon read it twice. He didn't know what the property line had to do with any of this, and he didn't have time to find out. The chain outside was getting closer to finished by the second, and Arlo was starting to ask real questions instead of scared ones. He told Arlo, still grinning, still in the voice, that he was going to go deal with the psycho outside. Arlo believed him, because Arlo had no reason not to. Waylon said the words, "That's enough, Harlan." Said them out loud to the door, the way they'd agreed. That was the deal. That was supposed to end it right there. He stepped out to make sure Harlan actually honored it. Before the chain got finished, before this went 1 second further than it needed to. The RV door eased shut behind him on its own hinge, quiet, almost polite about it. He didn't stop to consider that the deal he'd built to protect Arlo was the exact thing that had just walked him outside alone and left Arlo sitting in there without him. Outside, the flare light caught Harlan's face for half a second before he turned away from it, and something about the way he turned, unhurried, already expecting company, didn't sit right. Waylon filed it away. There wasn't time for it to sit right or wrong. There was only the chain and the kerosene and the 6:30 number ticking down somewhere behind all of it. Somewhere behind him, through glass he couldn't see, Arlo pressed a palm flat against the fogged-up window and watched the two shapes outside without being able to hear a single word either of them said. Waylon was barely off the RV steps when headlights swung up the logging spur, too fast for the ruts, and Dessa was out of the car before it had even finished rolling to a stop. She grabbed his arm before he could get past her. "Where's Arlo? Why is Harlan's truck here?" Why didn't either of them answer her texts? Waylon tried to shake loose. Every second he spent explaining was a second the chain outside kept getting rigged tighter. But Dessa wasn't letting go until he gave her something true, and she'd driven 40 minutes on a bad road to make sure of it. It cost him the better part of a minute he didn't have. Somewhere behind him, the 6:30 number kept ticking down whether he was standing here arguing or not. He finally broke free and reached Harlan in the flare light. Arlo was still watching through the window, palm flat against the glass, close enough to see both their faces and too far to hear one word of what either of them said. Harlan dropped the act completely and dropped something else right along with it. "You said the word, didn't you?" Not a question. Knew you would. Knew the second it stopped being funny, you'd say your little line and go handle it your own self, all noble about it, and leave him sitting right there alone. Waylon felt his stomach drop somewhere below his boots. Harlan hadn't needed a plan for fighting him. He'd only needed a plan for Waylon being exactly as good as his word. The same rule Waylon had been proud of 2 weekends ago, now turned around and used against him like it had been built for that purpose all along. A second understanding landed right under the first, heavier. Arlo's father had cost the Snodgrass family their sawmill years back. Waylon had heard the story secondhand at church suppers, never thought twice about it. Tonight wasn't a bit that had gotten out of hand. It had never been a bit. Not once. Not for Harlan, and the joke Waylon had helped write wasn't a joke to him either. The scuffle started fast. No more talking, just Harlan's shoulder driving into him, both of them going down hard into the mud between the RV and the truck, fists and elbows finding whatever they could reach. Mid-fight, Harlan broke free just long enough to slap the padlock through the chain on the RV door. One motion, done. Arlo was alone in there now. No way out. No way to reach either of them. And no way for either of them to reach him. That's when Harlan went for the kerosene can he'd already staged by the front tire, and the shotgun leaning against the bumper behind it, backup for however the fight with Waylon happened to go. Dessa didn't stay back. The second she saw Harlan reach for the can, she was moving too, grabbing at his arm, screaming at him to stop, not a bystander anymore. Harlan shoved her off like she weighed nothing. She went down hard against the truck's rear bumper, the taillight housing cracking somewhere under the sound of her skull hitting metal. She didn't get back up. Waylon had about half a second to choose which fight was his. Harlan was already moving for the gun. He chose Harlan because Harlan was the one holding the can. The chain rattled shut behind him mid-swing, and for one full second he thought the sound was only in his head, until he turned and saw Arlo's hand still pressed flat to the glass, going nowhere, watching all of it happen with no sound getting through to explain any of it. Waylon closed the distance on Harlan the instant before the kerosene splashed out across the dirt, before the gas fumes hit the flare light, before Dessa's shape by the bumper still hadn't moved, and somewhere in the back of his head, underneath all of it, he registered that the sky behind the tree line had gone from black to the first thin gray of something that wasn't night anymore. Smoke reached Waylon before the fire did, thin at first, curling up past the RV's back window, then thick fast, the kind of fast that meant the kerosene had found something worth catching. Arlo was still in there. The chain was still on the door. Harlan expected him to go for it anyway. Waylon could see that expectation sitting right there on his face. The same door, the same lock, the plan Harlan had been counting on since the fire ring. Waylon didn't go for the door. He broke off and threw his shoulder into the RV's rear hatch instead, the rotted one, the weak spot they'd both stepped past twice while scouting this place. The one Harlan had only ever thought about as a way out, never a way in. The aluminum gave on the second hit, folding inward with a shriek that swallowed whatever Harlan started to yell after him. He hadn't planned around this. For the first time all night, Waylon had done something Harlan didn't already know he'd do. Harlan came in right behind him, and the fight that had started in the mud kept going in a space the size of a closet. Both of them grabbing for the same shotgun in the smoke and the heat, and Arlo screaming somewhere just past all of it. The barrel swung wide, discharged into the floor an arm's length from Waylon's knee, close enough that the sound wasn't a sound anymore, just pressure, just a fist against both ears at once. Waylon's phone skidded loose in the scuffle and landed face up in the mud outside the hatch. 6:29. He didn't have time to think about what that number meant. He didn't need to. It flipped to 6:30. In the exact same half-second, the eastern ridge went from black to gray to something with actual color in it. First light breaking clean and sudden over the timber, like it had been waiting for a cue. Somewhere 40 minutes east, Arlo's mother was clocking out of the ER right now, expecting her son home, walking out to a car, and a morning that had nothing in it yet to tell her otherwise. Waylon had spent 5 hours racing that number. It beat him by exactly as much as it needed to. Harlan wrenched the shotgun free and racked it for a second round. Something answered the first shot before he could fire it. Not an echo, an answer, a second identical crack from 30 feet up in the canopy, where nothing carrying a shotgun should have had any business standing. Harlan's head came up. So did Waylon's. For one stretched, complete silence, no smoke crackle, no Arlo, nothing. Both of them stared at the same patch of dark canopy against a sky that was getting brighter by the second, and neither one of them found anything up there to look at. Then something dropped. It didn't fall the way a body falls. It came down controlled, angled, already reaching before it landed, and it took Harlan by the collarbones with a grip that lifted him half off his boots before his feet even registered the ground was gone. Waylon caught maybe 2 seconds of it, long enough to register that whatever had him was built wrong for climbing down out of a tree that fast, wrong in the shoulders, wrong in a way his eyes tried to correct and couldn't. And then it was gone into the timber, Harlan gone with it, moving at a speed that didn't belong to anything walking on legs. Harlan's scream faded out faster than distance should have let it, like something had reached in and turned it down. Waylon stood there in the widening light with the shotgun's discharge still ringing in both ears, and Arlo's hand, finally getting a grip on his sleeve from behind, pulling him back toward the hatch, toward the smoke, toward anything that wasn't the tree line. That's when he saw them properly for the first time. Not just around the tires like he'd noticed 2 weekends ago, but ringing this exact patch of ground, this exact spot where Harlan had just been standing. The same orange and black numbered stakes. Dozens of them, driven deep, curving off into the brush in a pattern too deliberate to be anybody's survey. Harlan's threat was gone, solved, in the worst way anybody could solve it. And standing in the space where he used to be was a canopy that had just proven in full daylight that it could reach all the way down to the ground, with nothing left between it and the 2 boys still standing in the clearing. If you're still here, please hit the like and subscribe button. It will help more viewers see these stories. Now, back to the nightmare. Dessa was the reason anybody found them at all. She'd come to by the truck's back bumper with blood running warm along her hairline, dazed enough that it took her 2 tries to remember what year it was, but not so dazed that she couldn't find 1 bar of signal and get a call out before the rest of it caught up to her. A Kentucky state trooper found Waylon on foot along the gravel spur, half carrying Arlo, who hadn't said a single word since the hatch. Not his name, not what happened, nothing. He wouldn't say a word for 3 more days after that, and when he finally did, it wasn't about Harlan at all. Dessa was already wrapped in a blanket in the back of the cruiser by then, her eyes fixed on the same tree line Waylon couldn't stop looking at either. The 6:30 deadline had already broken against all 3 of them back in that clearing. This was just the world finally catching up to it. Nobody found Harlan. Search teams walked that hollow for 6 days straight and came back with nothing they were willing to put in a report. What they did find went into an evidence bag. The stock of a shotgun, snapped clean in 2, and one thing that hadn't belonged to anyone still standing. Harlan's lighter, the one he'd flicked open and shut a dozen times too many back at 1:15 that morning. HS09, engraved on the side, the way it had been since his granddad gave it to him. Underneath those letters, scratched out but not gone, somebody had found older initials that didn't match his. Nobody in his family could say whose they were, or how long they'd been there under his. Days later, when investigators walked the ground in daylight, the stakes turned out to run further than anyone had noticed that night. Not just around the tires, not just around the clearing, but tracing a straight line into the tree line exactly where the drag marks stopped. Orange and black, numbered in a hand nobody recognized, decades older than any survey crew that had worked this district in living memory. Nobody had been marking that ground for a timber company. Nobody could say who had or why the numbering stopped in a neat, deliberate row right where Harlan went in. Something had been marking it for itself, a long time before Harlan Snodgrass was ever born to walk across it. That was the part nobody could write into a report, so nobody tried. Dawn birdsong finally came back over the troopers' radio static, ordinary and almost gentle, the kind of sound that made the whole hollow feel like nothing had happened there at all. Waylon looked back at the tree line once, just once on his way to the cruiser. He heard it again. Distant, deliberate, the same two-part crack from the canopy, answering nothing this time, because there was nothing left out there for it to answer. He didn't mention it to the trooper. The thing Waylon keeps coming back to, more than the fire or the chain or even the sound Harlan made going into the trees, is that sound afterward. The second one, with no shotgun left to explain it. He's got a theory about what it means. He's just never been all that sure he wants to be right. Out here, folks like to say the woods keep their own numbers. After what happened in that hollow, Waylon stopped arguing with them.